Hey, Gillis here. I'm doing some narration in this one because it's a pretty complicated build. I hope you don't mind. So I was asked to build a ping pong table / dining table, and never having built a table before, I thought it would be a good challenge. It's made from rough sawn walnut and birch, and I began by cutting up the birch and stacking it so it could rest and relieve any tension after the rip cuts. While it was resting, I could start planing the walnut. I created one flat face and two square and parallel edges. The other face was left rough at this point. I had 11 of these boards to do, so it took a while. Some ends had cracks, so I cut those off. And trimmed the end grain a bit. To get the length I needed, I cut one of the boards into a few short pieces to splice onto the others, which I could do with dowels and this quick and ugly dowel jig to line up the holes. I flush cut the added bits. And playing the transition smooth. I'm gluing the top together in two parts. Here I'm marking locations with some alignment dowels on the first half. And I could use the jig again. I have a video on these clamps if you want to see. They're simple 2x2 constructions with large span, and I can close them with a drill and do the final tightening by hand. Now I could flatten the underside of the top. There were some knots in the boards and also a few gaps where they didn't join perfectly, so I prepared these for an epoxy fill with some packing tape before flipping the table over. I used clear epoxy for the knots and mixed it with some walnut dust for the gaps. The final thing to do to the table halves was to cut them so they were equally wide. Here I'm working on the part I think of as the spine of the table. This is what everything will connect to. I measured up the length of the table minus the 2 drawers that will go underneath the short ends. Centered this measurement and cut away these bits to allow the drawers to sit here. I also made 2 of these notches. You'll see why soon. And then I could do the big glue up. I cut a decorative angle on the ends of 2 boards that will serve as crossbars to keep the top from cupping. I also needed a few thinner boards, so I could use bed base slats for that. Here you can see the crossbars sitting in the slots I made in the spine earlier. I cut a corresponding slot in the crossbars to form a half-lap joint. And glued the bed base slats to the top of the beams. This is a cutoff from the birch. I guess cleats would be the word for what I'm making here. I clamped a couple of sticks to the saw blade as a simple depth stop. This way of attaching the top to the crossbar should allow seasonal movement in the table. could use the circ saw to cut the table to final length now. I wanted to put a big chamfer along the edges, and I thought about using the circ saw for that too, but it couldn't tilt to the angle that I wanted, and hand planes are more fun anyway. Okay, so these diagonal beams are what the legs will attach to. I needed more half laps to set them into the crossbars. They need to detach for transport, so I fasten them with screws. This is where I decided to build the drawers. I could get the sides from a birch cutoff that I resawed to thickness. For the back I made a dovetail, as they're starting to be fairly quick for me to cut. I plowed a groove for the bottom, and then I moved on to the front joint. I went for a triple mortise and tenon, as I wanted a completely hidden joint there. With tenons this small, it's almost like a blind box joint. I needed some thin pieces for drawer glides. And I could glue those on. And I cut out a space for your hand to pull the drawer with. Now for the legs, I planed up a glue surface on 8 boards of birch and glue them together to double thickness. Then I could plane a reference face and check that it was flat. And a reference end. I measured and marked the tapers, no specific angle, just something that looked right. I didn't cut the taper though. Leaving the legs square made them easier to hold onto while cutting the joint. This is just like sewing large tenon cheeks, but I cut on the inside of the scribe line and removed the center instead. I could use another leg as a guide to pare down to the correct angle. And when that was done, I could cut the tapers and plane them shiny. So, planing the top. I knew I would have to do this, which is why I left one side rough when preparing the stock. I did not realize that it would be 30 hours of back-breaking, knee-crushing agony. But the table is just so wide, this was the only way for me to reach the middle. It was a useful experience. The last tool to touch the top was my cabinet scraper. I gave the edges a small chamfer too. I guess this is the last tool technically. with the elephant out of the room, so to speak, I flipped the top up again and removed the diagonals so I could attach the legs. They're splayed at a quite severe angle, so I needed really tight shoulders to resist the torque the top will be putting on the legs. I kept the ends of the legs square so I could hammer them in place, but now I could cut them to the final angle. And with that, the table was done. This is boiled linseed oil. I just love how it looks and how it feels to the touch. And it's easy to maintain and repair too. All in all, I should not have taken on this project. It was just too big to be enjoyable. But I think it worked out in the end, and I learned a ton, of course. So it was a valuable experience. My next projects are gonna be much smaller for a while. I hope you'll join me for those. Thanks.